This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Okay, let's unpack this. When most people think about, the history of Western thought, they often picture this big showdown, faith versus reason, religion versus science.
Right, like it was this clean, abstract debate happening in universities or something.
Exactly. But the sources we're looking at today, they paint a very different picture. They argue this view is just, way too shallow.
It really wasn't some polite intellectual disagreement. I mean, the material suggests it was more like a centuries-long political war, a really brutal one, fought with theological arguments as weapons.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive is to get into the, let's say, the intellectual architecture of the early modern period. We want to show how that famous clash was actually structural.
It was the old guard, the integrated Catholic universal order, really fighting for its survival against this new kid on the block, the emerging Protestant rational order.
And to really get a grip on this massive shift, we're going to use this fantastic metaphor that runs through the sources. The idea of building and then ultimately destroying the house of reason.
It's a great way to visualize it. We'll trace how philosophers tried to construct this safe structure for truth, and it culminates in this really dramatic family saga, you could say, involving Immanuel Kant and his philosophical heirs.
His sons, yeah. Who basically decided whether to renovate his house, add an extension, or just burn it down.
Pretty much.
And you should care about this, because understanding how this structure was built and why it eventually crumbled, it doesn't just explain dusty old philosophy books. It fundamentally shapes why our modern world struggles so much with science, morality, and, the place of private faith.
Yeah.
We're basically giving you the original blueprints.
Okay, so let's start with the crisis point, the real flashpoint. Many people assume, maybe because of the whole Dark Ages idea, that the big conflict was medieval.
Right, you think of monks and knights debating.
Yeah, but the sources pinpoint the early modern era, specifically that intense century between about 1550 and 1650. That's when things really boiled over, socially and intellectually.
And that timing is so important, isn't it? Because it lines up perfectly with the actual political crumbling of that universal religious authority.
Exactly. You've got the Catholic Church trying to circle the wagons with the Council of Trent. Meanwhile, the whole power structure of Europe is shifting.
And it all kind of gets formalized, politically anyway, with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which basically set up the modern state system, sovereign states, each deciding its own religious path, more or less.
And the fallout from that rift, it was messy. I mean, really severe. This theological and political split didn't just happen on paper.
Nope.
It coincides precisely with the peak intensity of things like the witch trials and the ongoing force of the Inquisition. When an old authority feels threatened, it tends to lash out violently.
Which puts the Galileo trial in context, 1633. It wasn't just about telescopes and planets, was it?
Not at all. It was a late, almost desperate attempt by that old order to control knowledge, to exile the very idea of finding truth through observation.
Bottom-up truth finding.
Yeah.
Empiricism.
Yes. That was seen as almost treasonous to the established top-down truth handed down by the church.
So this conflict, it actually split the very idea of reason itself. Sources make this brilliant distinction, right, between two kinds of rationality.
They do. It's based on the warring sides. On one hand, you had what we can call Catholic rationality.
Okay.
This was very deductive, very systematic. Think scholasticism. It was a kind of defensive reason. Its main job was internal consistency, protecting the truth that was already established, already inherited. It served theology.
Got it. Guarding the fortress.
The challenger.
The challenger was, let's call it Protestant rationality. This focused much more on the empirical. Inductive reasoning, experimentation, individual observation, what we'd recognize today as scientific reason.
Finding truth from the ground up.
Precisely. Individual interpretation, direct experience, observing the world yourself. One was about guarding the existing order. The other was about discovering new facts, potentially outside that order. Okay, so that's the war zone. Intense conflict. Reason itself is fractured. How do you find any kind of safety in that? And this is where René Descartes steps in.
Yes, Descartes, the first architect of our house. He sees the chaos. He sees people like Galileo getting punished for looking at the world. He realizes reason needs, well, a safe space.
A refuge.
Exactly, a refuge. And he proposes his famous split, res extensa and res cogitans.
Mind and matter.
Right. The material world, that's res extensa, governed by mathematics, physics, that's science's playground. Then there's res cogitans, the mind, spirit, faith, ethics.
And this wasn't just some abstract philosophical point he was making. It was deeply practical, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He was essentially drawing a line in the sand for the church, saying, look, science will stick to the material stuff, the mathematics. We won't mess with the soul, morality, faith. That's your territory.
Don't cross the street, we won't cross the street.
Basically. And this created that separate, independent space for reason, the first refuge of reason.
But how did he secure it? I mean, the church was still powerful. What stopped them from just attacking this new refuge?
This is the clever bit. To make the refuge safe, Descartes had to guarantee that the findings of reason, especially mathematical findings, were actually true and reliable. And how did he do that?
He brought God back in.
He did. He rested the entire foundation, the roof, the security system of this house of reason explicitly on Veracitas Dei, the theological guarantee that God is not a deceiver.
Wow. So the only way reason could be independent from the church was by having its truthfulness guaranteed by God's character. That's intricate.
It's brilliant intellectual maneuvering. God's honesty becomes the ultimate insurance policy for science. So reason gets its own protected room, but God is still, in a sense, the guarantor of the whole building.
The cross is still on the roof, so to speak, but reason has its own wing.
Exactly. The integrity of this new scientific space depended entirely on that theological assurance at that point in time.
Okay, let's jump forward about a century. We're in the 18th century now, Kant's time, and the whole atmosphere has changed, right?
Completely shifted. The intense persecutions, the religious wars, that madness has largely subsided. Reason isn't hiding in a refuge anymore.
It's out. It's running the show.
It's basically the dominant force governing through Enlightenment principles through sovereign states. The church is now often managed by the state, not the other way around.
So Kant arrives on this scene, 1724 to 1804. He sees reason in power. Science is advancing, but he's worried.
He is. He sees reason winning, but he's concerned it might become just as dogmatic, just as arrogant as the old religious order it fought against. He's looking for a lasting peace, a stable settlement between faith and reason, not just a truce.
And this leads to his big compromise, and that famous kind of counterintuitive quote.
I had to abolish knowledge to make room for faith. Yes.
That sounds like he's siding against reason initially.
It sounds like a retreat, but it's actually an incredibly clever piece of philosophical architecture. Kant realized the only way to protect faith from being completely bulldozed by scientific reason was to set clear philosophical limits on what theoretical reason, what we can actually know through experience and science, could legitimately claim to understand.
He basically drew a boundary line for science, said you can know this much, the world of appearances, the phenomenal world.
But you cannot go beyond that. You can't access the thing in itself, the world as it really is, independent of our senses.
Exactly.
And beyond that boundary.
That's where faith could live.
Yeah.
That's the legitimate domain for things like moral freedom, God, the immortality of the soul. These are things we can believe based on practical reason, on morality, but we can't know them scientifically.
So he creates the annex.
The annex. Perfect term. Faith gets moved out of the main house, where it used to claim universal authority over everything. Now it's relegated to this protected, private, moral space. Still within the larger structure governed by reason, but separate. Okay, wait. So the church, which used to be the ultimate authority, hunting down a heretical reason, now it has to accept being like a tenant in an annex built by reason itself. That seems humbling.
It was a massive demotion, absolutely. But you could also see it as a survival strategy for the church.
How so?
Well, having lost its political dominance and its grip on explaining the natural world, the church had to find a new role. This compromise gave it one. It moved from being the hunter to being the protected guest, focusing on private morality, ethics, inner life. A quieter existence, but a protected one.
So it traded universal authority for protected relevance in the moral sphere.
Precisely. And Kant didn't let reason get too big for its boots either. He put a check on it, especially in his critique of judgment.
How did he do that?
By showing a certain respect for what he called divine creation, the feeling of purpose or design we get when we look at the beauty and complexity of nature. He argued this sense of natural purpose often feels deeper, more profound than human-made art, human creation.
So even though reason is the ruler of the house, Kant reminds it that it might still be part of a bigger, perhaps morally ordered universe it can't fully grasp. A final touch of humility.
Exactly. A self-imposed limit on reason's own sovereignty. The Kantian house is built, stable, and orderly. For now.
Okay, so Kant builds this intricate house. Reason is in charge, faith has its own protected annex, everything seems settled. But there's one critical feature, this forbidden door.
The door to the thing in itself, the ding and sitch, yes.
Kant insisted that this door must remain closed. Reason can know that something is behind it, reality, independent of our minds, but it can never, ever open it and see what's there. That boundary was crucial.
It was the whole point. It protected the limits of knowledge and secured the space for faith and morality. It was the non-negotiable foundation of the entire settlement.
But Kant had philosophical children, so to speak, the German idealists who followed him. And like many children, they didn't quite listen to their father's warnings.
No, they didn't. They looked at that do not enter sign on the ding and sitch door and basically said, challenge accepted. This kicks off the family drama.
First his son, Fichte, the transgressor. He walks right up to the forbidden door.
And kicks it down. Fichte just refused to accept Kant's limit. He throws open the door, looks inside, and what does he see? Not God, not some external objective reality.
Why?
His own reflection, the ego, the each. For Fichte, the entire world, including the supposed ding and such, becomes a projection of the active, striving, rational self. Subjectivity becomes the ultimate reality.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So he collapses the external world into the self, turns the house of reason into a hall of mirrors.
Pretty much. The objective thing in itself just dissolves. The boundary is gone because the self creates its own reality.
Oh, that's one way to deal with Dad's rules.
Yeah.
Then comes Schelling, the romantic. He also goes to the door Fichte opened.
But Schelling sees something different. He doesn't just see the ego. He looks through the doorway and sees nature's beauty. For him, the reality beyond subjective consciousness wasn't just the self. It was this living spiritual force in nature itself, a different kind of divine.
So more mystical, more aesthetic.
Exactly. He tried to bridge the Kantian gap, not just with the ego, but through art, feeling, and this sense of spiritual harmony between reason and the natural world. He wanted to keep some sense of mystery, but find it in beauty and connection, not just abstract morality.
Trying to patch things up, maybe. Okay, so Fichte turns inward, Schelling looks outward to nature. The house is still standing, but the foundations are shaking. And now, the heavyweight arrives. Hegel, the integrator.
Ah, Hegel. He looked at all these boundaries, Kant's limits, the ding and sitch, the wall around the annex, and saw them not as permanent fixtures, but as, well, temporary misunderstandings. Things reason hadn't yet figured out how to absorb.
He thought reason could understand everything, no limits.
Essentially, yes. For Hegel, reason's destiny was to overcome all apparent contradictions and limits. So he didn't just open the door. He systematically demolished the annex wall. He pulled everything, the ding and sitch, religion, history, art, into the main house of reason.
He didn't kick religion out, though.
No, interestingly, he gave it a specific place. But it was definitely a subordinate place. He saw religion as a kind of old father figure, or maybe the childhood stage of philosophical reason.
So, like, religion expressed important truths, but in myths and symbols.
Exactly. Truths that only mature philosophical reason, specifically his system, could finally grasp conceptually and integrate fully. So religion gets a seat in the house, but it's the lower seat, understood and encompassed by the grand system of absolute reason.
Okay, so the house is now this massive, all-encompassing structure run by Hegel's absolute reason. God is sort of grandfathered in, but then comes the final act.
Then comes Nietzsche, the destroyer.
He looks at this whole structure, Descartes' refuge, Kant's careful settlement, the idealists' renovations and expansions.
And he sees the whole thing as built on sand. He famously declares God is dead, killing off the old father figure that Hegel had tried to respectfully contain. But he doesn't stop there.
No.
He looks at the new ruler of the house, reason itself, whether it's Fichte's ego, Hegel's system, or even just scientific rationality, and he sees it as nothing more than the last shadow of God.
Wow. The last shadow of God, what does that mean?
It means that reason, with its claim to absolute truth, its laws of logic, its universal morality, it's just another form of belief in a higher absolute authority. It's faith disguised as logic, a new idol replacing the old one.
So Nietzsche refused to let reason take the throne either.
He refused completely. He denied the ultimate validity of both faith and the kind of absolute reason that tried to replace or contain it. Declaring God is dead wasn't just about theology. It was about rejecting all foundations for absolute truth. And so he sets fire to the entire thing. He burns down the whole house of reason, the structure built by Descartes, ordered by Kant, expanded by the idealists. The whole metaphysical project goes up in flames. Hashtag, outro.
So we've traced this incredible arc. Reason starts as this fugitive, needing protection in Descartes' time.
Then it becomes this self-limiting ruler under Kant, carefully managing its relationship with faith in the Annex.
And finally, the whole structure, including reason itself, is torn down as a false idol by Nietzsche.
Yeah, the sources really portray Nietzsche's fire as all-consuming. It wasn't just aimed at religion, it targeted the very belief in any absolute foundation, God, objective reason, universal morality, the whole kit and caboodle.
Which leaves us with a really critical question, doesn't it? After Nietzsche's fire burns down the entire philosophical house that Western thought had been building for centuries, what's left? What's standing on the bare ground?
It's a huge question. The source material suggests the answer isn't just nihilism or chaos, interestingly. What survives, or rather, what is affirmed in the face of this destruction, is life itself.
Life. How so?
As the will to power, not necessarily domination, but the sheer creative, dynamic impulse to create value, to generate meaning, precisely because there's no pre-given divine blueprint or absolute rational framework to rely on.
The affirmation of creation in the absence of foundations.
Something like that. Which brings us to the final thought for you, the listener.
If the sources are right, and neither traditional faith nor pure objective reason can provide that ultimate unshakable guarantee for truth or meaning, what foundation, what architectural principles do you rely on to build your own understanding of the world? What holds up your house?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.